The last rays of the autumn sun filtered through the airplane window, casting golden shadows over the clouds that stretched out like a sea of cotton beneath our wings. I observed that spectacle with a certain melancholy, wondering if I had made the right decision by accepting this invitation. At 64 years old, after 4 decades dedicated to teaching history at Chicago State University, I had developed a particular sensitivity toward human behavior, an ability to detect the unspoken and hidden intentions. This skill had served me well throughout my career, allowing me to perceive the lies of my students or to detect the underlying tensions during academic board meetings. Today, that same intuition stirred inside me like an alarm signal. I was en route to New York City, a flight from Chicago that was supposed to allow me to reunite with my daughter Emily and her husband Ryan for a week of vacation. It was a proposal that had surprised me at first, considering our relationship had cooled down over these past few years, especially since the passing of my wife Mary. Dad. It would be wonderful to spend time together. Emily had insisted on the phone a week earlier. Ryan organized everything. It is our gift. A gift. A strange choice of words to describe an invitation that arrived after months of absolute silence. Emily and Ryan were settled in seats 12A and 12B, 3 rows ahead of me. They had used a reservation error as an excuse to justify this separation. There were only individual seats left when we booked yours, Ryan had explained with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Since boarding, I had noticed several unsettling details. Their furtive glances in my direction, the incessant whispers, the way Emily nervously checked her phone before hastily putting it away when I approached. Ryan had insisted on carrying my carry-on luggage, even trying to convince the gate agents to put it in the cargo hold, despite it being the standard size. "It is too heavy for you, Frank," he had said. "Let me take care of that." I had politely refused, using the excuse that I needed my medications during the flight. In reality, I had never had health problems that required treatment. But for the past few weeks, Emily had been constantly worrying about my fragility, a term she had never used before. The plane had just reached its cruising altitude. The captain had turned off the seatbelt sign, and the cabin crew began their service. A flight attendant approached my row, pushing the beverage cart. "What would you like to drink?" "Sir," she asked with a professional smile. "A tea, please." No sugar. She prepared my drink and then leaned in to hand it to me. It was at that precise moment that her expression changed. Her eyes narrowed slightly, fixing on something or someone behind me. When she turned back to me, her face had recovered its mask of friendliness. But something was different. She placed the cup on my tray, and as she adjusted my napkin, she leaned in so close that I could smell her delicate perfume. "Get up, and do not look back," she murmured, her lips barely moving. I almost spilled my tea. "Excuse me," I stammered. She continued smiling as if she were simply explaining the location of the restrooms to me. "Pretend to be sick and get off this plane as soon as possible," she whispered before adding out loud, "Here is your napkin. Sir, enjoy." Then she continued her service, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and an icy feeling in my chest. I stared at my tea, suddenly suspicious. Was this a warning about my drink? I gently pushed it to the side, pretending to let it cool. My mind was spinning at full speed, frantically analyzing the situation. Why would a stranger advise me to leave the plane? Was this a bad joke? An unusual security protocol? A case of mistaken identity, I discreetly observed Emily and Ryan. My daughter was nervously typing on her phone, her face tense. Ryan seemed to be watching the flight attendant, following her movements with an unsettling intensity in his eyes. The flight attendant returned a few minutes later to collect the empty cups. Her name tag read Claire. As she leaned close to me, she murmured with more urgency, "I am begging you. It is a matter of life and death. The front bathroom. Now, this time, I perceived genuine terror in her voice. This was not a joke. This woman was afraid for me. My decision was made in a fraction of a second. I unbuckled my seatbelt and stood up, carefully avoiding looking in the direction of Emily and Ryan. I walked with a measured pace toward the front of the aircraft, toward the restrooms located near the cabin. Claire was waiting for me there, in the galley area reserved for the crew. Her professional mask had vanished, revealing a pale and anguished face. "Sir, I am sorry to alarm you like this," she said in a low voice, checking to make sure no one could hear us. "But you must get off this plane." "Why? What is going on?" "I overheard a conversation in the terminal bathrooms before boarding," she explained hastily. "Your daughter and her husband. They were talking about medication in your drink, about a heart attack at high altitude, complicated investigations, and life insurance money. $500,000. The world began to spin around me. What she was saying was so monstrous, so unthinkable, that my first instinct was to categorically reject her words. And yet, the pieces were falling together with terrifying logic. The sudden invitation, Ryan's insistence on booking the plane tickets, the furtive glances, their recent concerns about my health, the attempts to take my luggage, the life insurance policy I had taken out years ago with Emily as the sole beneficiary. "Do you have proof?" I asked. Surprised by the calmness of my own voice, Claire pulled out her phone with trembling fingers. "I recorded part of their conversation. I know I should not have, that it is a violation of privacy. But something told me I had to." She pressed play. The recording was of poor quality, mostly picking up the echo of the bathrooms and the ambient noise of the airport. But my daughter's voice was perfectly recognizable, clinical and detached. "The pills will dissolve completely in his tea. He will not notice a thing. The altitude increases the cardiac risks. It is perfect. A medical emergency at 30,000 feet. Limited intervention. Natural death. No one will suspect a thing." Ryan's voice was more hesitant. "Are you sure about the amount? $500,000. Immediate payout." I checked the clauses, followed by a brief laugh from Emily, a laugh I did not recognize. Cold and calculating, I closed my eyes, absorbing the shock. My own daughter, methodically planning my murder at 30,000 feet in the air. "Why are you doing this?" I asked Claire, risking her job for a stranger. A shadow crossed her face, revealing a personal pain. "My father," she said simply, 3 years ago. His nephew convinced him to change his will. Then, he accidentally fell down the stairs. The investigation concluded it was an accident. No one believed me when I suggested otherwise." She briefly squeezed my arm. "I could not save my father, but I can save you." "What should I do? Fake an illness?" "We will declare a medical emergency and return to the airport. It is the only way to get you off this aircraft." I nodded, taking a deep breath. "One last thing?" I asked. "Who was my daughter talking to in the bathroom? Was Ryan with her?" "No. She was alone. She was on the phone with someone. I did not hear who." This information echoed with a recent memory. Ryan hastily abandoning our family dinner to take an important call. Emily refusing to leave me alone in their apartment in New York City during my last visit. The whispers behind closed doors. I realized the plot likely extended beyond the couple. One more reason to accept Claire's help. I returned to the center aisle. Reaching halfway to my seat, I brought my hand to my chest. I stumbled slightly, then collapsed onto one knee in the middle of the aisle. My My chest. I stammered loud enough to be heard by the neighboring passengers. The reaction was immediate. Passengers called out for help. The cabin crew rushed over. In the ensuing confusion, I caught a glimpse of Emily and Ryan's faces. No concern. No anguish. Just obvious disappointment. Quickly masked by feigned worry when they realized they were being watched, Ryan stood up, his movement revealing more irritation than concern. Dad. What is wrong? Should we go with you? No. Please remain seated. A flight attendant ordered firmly. We will take care of him. The captain of the aircraft announced our return to Chicago due to a medical reason. It was at that moment that panic set in on the plane. Not for all the passengers, but for two in particular. While they settled me into a wheelchair to take me back to the terminal, I heard my daughter murmur to Ryan, thinking she was out of earshot. This ruins everything. The whole plan is lost. Ryan's hissing response. Not here. Not now. Back in the terminal. In a small medical room. An airport doctor examined me quickly. Your vital signs are normal? He concluded. Probably an anxiety attack. The stress of the flight, perhaps. I nodded, accepting his diagnosis without correcting him. After he left, Claire caught up with me. The plane took off again, she said. Your daughter and her husband are on board. I told my supervisor I was taking my break now. What should I do? I asked, suddenly feeling vulnerable and disoriented. Do not go back to your house, she advised firmly. They will go back there as soon as they can catch another flight. Do you have a trusted friend you can go to, someone they do not know? I thought of my old colleague, Peter Evans. We had taught together for 30 years. But he had only met my daughter 2 or 3 times at university events. He now lived in the Chicago suburbs. Yes, I have someone. Good. And contact a lawyer immediately. I have everything documented. The recording, my testimony, the circumstances. I will give you my contact information. While she wrote her number on a piece of paper, I observed this young woman who had probably just saved my life. Why are you taking so many risks? Her gaze hardened, revealing a determination of steel beneath her delicate appearance. Because I have lived with doubt and regret for 3 years. Because no one listened to my concerns about my father. Because justice must sometimes be provoked, not simply awaited. She handed me the paper with her details. I will testify if necessary. Thank you, I said simply, unable to fully express my gratitude for this gesture that had likely changed the course of my existence. The taxi that took me to Peter's house drove through Chicago under the fine afternoon rain, the city lights reflecting on the wet pavement. The driver tried to make conversation, but I was too preoccupied to answer with more than a few monosyllables. Missed your flight? He finally asked. No, I replied, looking out the window at the pedestrians rushing under their umbrellas. I avoided something much worse. Peter received me with surprise, but without excessive questions, respecting my visible state of shock. It was only after settling into his guest room and pouring myself a shot of whiskey that I began to explain the situation to him. My God. Frank, he murmured in disbelief. Your own daughter? I need to understand why, I said, more to myself than to Peter. It is not just the money. Emily has always been financially comfortable. People kill for less than that, Peter observed soberly. But you are right. Maybe there is something else. That night, unable to sleep, I began to methodically examine the events of the past few months, applying the analytical rigor I had developed over 4 decades of teaching history. I opened my laptop and logged into my online accounts. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Bank transfers that I had never authorized. Small sums at first. $50 here. $100 there. then increasingly larger amounts. In total, nearly $50,000 had disappeared from my accounts over the last 6 months. How was this possible? I regularly checked my bank statements. Or at least I thought I did. A deeper exploration revealed that my email address for notifications had been changed. Transaction confirmations were being redirected to an address I did not recognize. Even more disturbing, upon accessing my life insurance folder, I discovered that the beneficiary had been changed 3 months ago. It was no longer just Emily, but Emily and Ryan. The signature at the bottom of the document looked like mine, but the curves of the F in Frank were different. A skillfully executed but imperfect forgery. The next morning, following Claire's advice, I contacted a lawyer. Attorney Catherine Miller received me in her office downtown, listening attentively to my story without showing disbelief. Unfortunately, Frank, what you are describing is not as rare as one might think, she commented after examining Claire's recording and my bank statements. The financial exploitation of the elderly is on the rise, although escalating to an attempted murder remains exceptional. What do you advise? We must build a solid case before involving the authorities. We need irrefutable proof. The recording is an excellent start, but it is insufficient for a conviction. We must prove the forgery of documents, the unauthorized transfers, and ideally, obtain confessions or additional proof of the plot. How should we proceed? For now, they think you are unaware of everything. That is our advantage. They will try to regain contact, lure you back into their trap. When they do, we will be ready. Attorney Miller elaborated a meticulous strategy. I moved temporarily to Peter's house, abandoning my apartment in Chicago, which Emily and Ryan knew. We hired a computer expert to secure my accounts and monitor any access attempts. A private detective began to investigate the couple's financial background, looking for potential motives beyond the life insurance. As expected, Emily contacted me the day after her return to the city. Dad, we are terribly worried. Her voice on the phone was laden with perfectly simulated concern. The hospital told us you refused to be admitted and that you disappeared. Where are you? I am fine. Emily, I replied calmly. I decided to stay at a friend's house for a few days. But did you have a heart problem? You need to see a doctor. Ryan and I can come pick you up immediately. It was just an anxiety attack, I said, playing dumb. I will rest for a bit and then go back home. A silence on the other end of the line. Then, okay, Dad, but promise me you will call if you feel sick again. And let us know when you return. We will come see you. Of course. Sweetie. After hanging up, I forwarded the recording of the conversation to Attorney Miller. They will try to finish what they started. She commented. We must be prepared. The results of the detective's investigation arrived 3 days later, revealing disturbing discoveries. Ryan, supposedly a prosperous financial advisor, was actually plagued by debts, mainly gambling debts, amounting to over $100,000. His investment firm had been losing money for 2 years, and he had already exhausted Emily's dowry, as well as their joint savings. Even more unsettling, this was not the first time Ryan had been involved in a shady affair. 5 years ago, he had been the subject of an investigation concerning financial embezzlement. At the expense of an elderly client, the case had been closed without further action, due to a lack of sufficient evidence. As for Emily, the investigation revealed that she had recently taken out an additional life insurance policy in my name, without my knowledge, using forged documents and her apartment address to receive the correspondence. It is a carefully crafted plot, Attorney Miller concluded. They built it over several months, maybe longer, a week after the airplane incident. I agreed to meet Emily and Ryan at a coffee shop near the downtown market, a public and safe place where Attorney Miller and her assistant could discreetly observe us from a neighboring table. I was equipped with a recording device hidden in my watch. Emily kissed me with an effusion that I now found repulsive. "Dad, you look tired. Are you sure you are okay?" "And as okay as possible for a man who almost died on a plane," I responded. Watching her reaction closely, Ryan had a slight flinch, quickly controlled. "The important thing is that you are feeling better now. We were terribly worried." The conversation continued in that falsely cordial tone, until I deliberately brought up the topic that interested them. "I am reflecting on my future. You know, at my age, one must think about these things. The organization of my estate, my last wishes." Ryan's eyes lit up with a spark that I now recognized as pure greed. "That is very wise. I'm frank. I actually know an excellent wealth advisor who could help you. In fact, I already scheduled an appointment with my lawyer next week. I was thinking of revising my will." Emily placed her hand over mine in a gesture that was meant to be affectionate. "That is an excellent idea. Dad, do you need help getting there? We could go with you." "That would be very kind," I said, feigning gratitude. "I really appreciate your support, especially after that scare on the plane." "Speaking of the plane," Ryan said, affecting a nonchalant tone, "the flight attendant who took care of you, did she tell you anything before your illness? I mean, the trap was clumsy. I avoided it with an ease that surprised even myself." "No, nothing in particular. Why, simple curiosity," he replied, exchanging a quick glance with Emily. "Some passengers mentioned she seemed agitated." Our meeting ended with an insistent invitation to have dinner at their house the following Friday. "We will make your favorite roast dinner," Emily promised. "And we will talk about that will. It is important to get these things in order." As soon as they left the coffee shop, Attorney Miller approached. "We recorded everything. His interest in the flight attendant is particularly revealing. They are preparing a new attempt," I murmured, still shaken by this encounter with two people I no longer recognized. My own daughter transformed into a calculating stranger. Her husband, a cornered financial predator. "It is likely." The lawyer agreed. "I strongly advise you against going to that dinner, at least not without substantial precautions." But I had another idea, an approach that might allow us to obtain the definitive proof we needed. The plan was risky but potentially decisive. With Attorney Miller's help, I contacted the state police. Inspector Davis, a specialist in fraud and financial exploitation cases, took my statement with a seriousness that I found comforting. "What you are proposing is dangerous, Frank," he warned, "but I understand your reasoning. If we can catch them in the act." The preparation was meticulous. I was equipped with a sophisticated recording device and a watch with an emergency alert function. 2 inspectors would be stationed in a van near Emily and Ryan's apartment, ready to intervene at the slightest sign of danger. A third agent, posing as a delivery driver, would remain in the lobby of the building. On Friday evening, I knocked on their door with a mix of apprehension and resolve. Emily welcomed me with excessive hugs. The apartment was spotless, the table elegantly set, a perfect staging for what was supposed to be my last meal. "Dad, sit down. Ryan is opening a bottle of your favorite aged bourbon." I accepted the glass they handed me, pretending to drink it without actually doing so. The conversation was strangely normal at first. News of mutual acquaintances, comments on current events, childhood memories carefully selected by Emily. Then, as expected, Ryan steered the discussion toward estate matters. "So, ever 12-5. That appointment with your lawyer is still on. Indeed. Next Tuesday. I have reflected a lot on the distribution of my assets. Emily tilted her head, adopting an expression of polite disinterest that fooled no one. You know that is not important to us. Dad, your health is our priority. My health, exactly. I deliberately left my sentence hanging. What, is there a problem? Emily's concern seemed sincere. But I now knew she was an excellent actress. The doctor found some cardiac anomalies. Nothing serious. But let us just say the incident on the plane was perhaps not a simple anxiety attack. Ryan and Emily exchanged a look that I immediately identified as calculating. They were re-evaluating their plans in light of this new information. All the more reason for you to take care of yourself, Emily said, her hand squeezing mine. Maybe you should stay here for a few days. We would take care of you. That is kind, but I prefer my independence. Ryan got up to serve dinner, a roast dinner whose aroma should have been appetizing, but which now seemed threatening to me. Emily served me a generous portion, insisting that I eat to regain my strength. I moved the food around on my plate, simulating an appetite without actually consuming anything. The conversation continued, but I felt a growing tension. This bourbon is particularly good, I commented, raising my practically untouched glass. It has a special flavor. A flash of satisfaction crossed Ryan's gaze. It is from an exceptional batch. About 20 minutes after the meal began, I started to play my part. Slight sweating, difficult breathing, a trembling hand brought to my chest. Dad, are you okay? Emily's voice contained just the right amount of concern to seem authentic. I do not feel very well, I stammered. It is like on the plane. My chest. Ryan stood up, but without excessive haste. I will get your medications. They are in your jacket, in your shirt pocket. While he ostensibly searched my pockets, I saw Emily discreetly check her phone. She nodded imperceptibly toward Ryan. I cannot find your medications, he announced. Maybe we should call an ambulance. No. Emily interrupted too quickly. Ambulances always take forever. We can take him to the emergency room ourselves. I intensified my acting, leaning slightly forward, my face tense with simulated pain. It is passing, I murmured. Maybe it is just anxiety. See, he is better, Emily said to Ryan. Let us wait a bit before calling anyone. Their lack of urgency to seek medical assistance was telling. Any normal human being would have already dialed 911 when faced with a man of my age presenting cardiac symptoms. Ryan helped me stand up, supporting me heavily on his arm. I am sorry to ruin the evening, I stammered. Do not worry about that, Emily replied with a sweetness that made my blood run cold. The important thing is that you rest. The guest room was immaculate, the bed carefully made. Ryan helped me lie down, taking off my shoes with an attentiveness that might have seemed touching under other circumstances. Try to sleep, he advised. We will come check on you. As soon as they closed the door, I activated the alert signal on my watch, indicating to the police that we were entering a critical phase. Then I closed my eyes, breathing deeply, listening to the noises of the apartment. Their voices reached me in muffled murmurs from the living room. I concentrated, trying to catch their conversation. Too soon to check, Ryan was saying. Let the product work. How much time? Emily's voice. Am patient. An hour, maybe 2. The doctor said it depends on his weight and general condition. And then, we call 911. Heart attack in his sleep. No one will question that. Not at his age. Are you sure they cannot trace it back to us? That flight attendant? Impossible to prove anything. And even if she talks, it will be her word against ours. A silence. Then Emily's voice again. I called Gary. He will come by tomorrow for the documents. Gary. A name I did not know. A third accomplice. Probably the one who had forged the insurance and bank documents. I waited approximately 15 minutes, then produced a dull thud by gently hitting the wall with my fist. A muffled groan followed. Then silence. The door opened slightly moments later. Ryan poked his head in, observing my motionless form on the bed. I kept my eyes closed, my breathing slow and irregular. He is sleeping, he murmured to Emily, who was waiting in the hallway. Are you sure? Look for yourself. I felt him approach the bed, scrutinizing my face to detect any sign of consciousness. I maintained my act, letting my mouth open slightly like that of a man deeply asleep. His breathing is strange, Emily commented. It is normal. The product affects the respiratory system first, then the heart. They left, leaving the door ajar. I waited even longer, listening to their movements in the apartment. A bottle uncorking, glasses clinking. They were already celebrating. About an hour later, I heard Ryan approaching again. This time, he fully entered the room, advancing to the bed. I felt him lean over me. Checking my breathing, he placed 2 fingers on my neck, feeling for my pulse. I consciously slowed my heart rate, a meditation technique I had learned years ago. Emily called softly. Come look. She entered in turn, approaching the bed. So, his pulse is very weak. I think it is almost over. How much longer? Hard to say. But he will not wake up. A silence. Then Emily's voice. Strangely detached. It is weird. I thought I would feel something. Guilt, maybe. But I feel nothing. It is better this way. Ryan replied. Focus on what comes next. Our new life. No more debts. No more anguish. Thanks to my father's money. Her voice was almost indifferent. He did not need it anymore anyway. He was alone. Getting older. We spared him years of decline and nursing homes. Their conversation chilled me to the bone. The ease with which they rationalized my murder as if they were doing me a favor. The total absence of remorse in my daughter's voice. My own daughter, whom I had raised, loved, supported all her life. We should call now, Ryan suggested. It will look more natural if we say he was not feeling well during dinner. Agreed. I will handle it. They left the room. It was time. I activated the alert signal on my watch again, giving the green light for the intervention. Less than 30 seconds later, the apartment doorbell rang. Powerful knocks followed almost immediately. Police open up, I heard Ryan's surprised exclamation. The sound of hurried footsteps. I opened my eyes, slowly sitting up. My body was stiff from having remained motionless for so long. More knocks. More insistent. State police? Open immediately, or we will break down the door. The sound of a key in the lock, the door opening. Authoritative voices. State police. Stay where you are. I stepped out of the room, stumbling slightly after the long immobility. In the entryway, Inspector Davis and 3 other officers held Ryan and Emily against the wall, proceeding with their identification. The look on my daughter's face when she saw me standing and conscious fell apart. The shock quickly gave way to comprehension, then to fury. Dad, what have you done? What I should have done from the beginning, I replied calmly. Sought the truth. Inspector Davis approached me. Are you all right? Frank, Do you need medical assistance? No. I am fine, physically. At least, Ryan shot me a venomous look. You do not have any proof. It is your word against ours. We recorded everything. The inspector replied, pointing to the hidden device in my shirt. Your conversation in the bedroom was particularly enlightening. An officer approached, holding an evidence bag containing the glass of bourbon that Ryan had served me. We will analyze this immediately. Emily, unlike Ryan, seemed to have collapsed inward. She stared at me, her eyes devoid of emotion, as if she were looking at a stranger. Why? I asked, unable to contain this question that tortured me. You are my daughter. I gave you everything. She looked away, refusing to answer. Inspector Davis signaled to his colleagues, take them to the station. Preliminary charge, attempted murder with premeditation. As they were escorted toward the exit, Emily turned sharply toward me. It was for your own good, too. You would have ended up like Grandma. Diminished. Pathetic. An empty shell. It was more humane this way. The door closed behind her words, leaving me alone in the apartment with Inspector Davis and an agent who was beginning to collect evidence. You should sit down. Frank, Davis suggested softly. This must have been exhausting. I sank onto the sofa, strangely empty. The rage, the betrayal, the horror. All of that would come later. For now, I only experienced a deep numbness, as if my mind refused to fully assimilate what had just happened. We will need your full statement tomorrow, Davis continued. And if the analysis of the bourbon confirms the presence of toxic substances, the case will be practically closed. I nodded mechanically. Who is Gary? I asked suddenly. They mentioned a guy named Gary who would come tomorrow for documents. Davis noted the information. We will investigate all their contacts. If there are more people involved, we will find them. That night, in the hotel where the police had placed me for safety, I reflected on the events that had led to this catastrophe. Where had I failed as a father? When had my daughter transformed into this person capable of coldly planning my murder? Was it simply the money? Or was there a deeper resentment that I had never perceived? The following days were a whirlwind of statements, legal proceedings, and disturbing revelations. The analysis of the bourbon confirmed the presence of a powerful sedative combined with a substance that provoked cardiac symptoms. In sufficient doses, the mixture was lethal and difficult to detect in a standard autopsy. The investigation revealed that Ryan was even more in debt than we had initially assumed. Gambling debts, disastrous investments, a lifestyle way above his means. Emily, for her part, had been dragged into his downward spiral, progressively accepting increasingly serious moral compromises to keep up appearances. The mysterious Gary turned out to be a forger that Ryan had employed to fake my signature on various documents. He was the one who had changed the beneficiaries of my life insurance and created false medical files suggesting the onset of dementia. Documentation they would have used to contest any will that had not been favorable to them. Even more disturbing, the investigation revealed that I was not his first victim. 2 years ago, Ryan's elderly aunt had passed away under similar circumstances. A nocturnal heart attack after a family dinner. The case had been classified as a natural death, but Inspector Davis had requested the reopening of the investigation. The trial that followed was as painful as it was highly publicized. The airplane plot case, as the newspapers had dubbed it, fascinated the public with its mix of family betrayal, greed, and providential twist. The testimony of Claire, the flight attendant who had intercepted the fateful conversation, was particularly emotional. I could not save my father, she declared on the stand. but I was able to prevent another family from being destroyed by greed. Emily and Ryan pleaded not guilty, but the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings of their conversation in the apartment, the toxicological analyses, the forged documents, the testimonies, everything converged toward an inescapable conclusion. They were found guilty of attempted murder with premeditation, fraud, forgery of documents, and embezzlement. The day of the verdict, sitting at the back of the courtroom, I watched my daughter as the judge pronounced her sentence. 18 years in prison. Ryan received 22. His criminal record and his role as the instigator having tipped the scales. Emily did not look up at me a single time during the entire trial. It was as if I had ceased to exist for her. Or perhaps she could not bear to confront the reality of what she had tried to do. Leaving the courthouse, besieged by journalists, I simply declared, "Justice has been served. I have nothing more to add." A year passed since those events that changed my life forever. I sold my apartment in Chicago, unable to continue living in a city that constantly reminded me of that betrayal. Those memories were on every corner. The coffee shop where I used to have breakfast with Emily when she was a little girl. The university where I had filled with pride seeing her graduate. The park where we played when she was barely learning to walk. Everything had become a painful reminder of what I had lost. Not only a daughter, but the illusion of having been a good father. I moved to a small town on the coast of Florida, just outside a small beach town, where no one knew my history, where I could simply be a retired history professor writing his memoirs and taking long walks on the beach at dawn. The house I rented was modest but cozy. Whitewashed walls. A small garden with bougainvilleas that bloomed in deep magenta tones. And a terrace from where I could see the ocean stretching out to infinity. The constant sound of the waves became my new companion. A rhythm that helped me sleep at night when the memories threatened to drown me. The first few months were the most difficult. There were days when I woke up momentarily, forgetting what had happened. Instinctively reaching for my phone to call Emily and tell her about some interesting article I had read, or to ask how she was doing. Then, reality hit me like a cold wave. My daughter was in prison for trying to murder me. Therapy helped. I found a psychologist in the beach town. Dr. Martin, a woman in her 50s with a calm voice and infinite patience. Twice a week I sat in her office, in a worn but comfortable armchair, and tried to make sense of the incomprehensible. Do not look for a logical reason where there is only greed and desperation. She advised me in one of our first sessions. Sometimes, people make decisions that defy all rational understanding. That does not reflect who you are as a father, but who they decided to be. Her words were a balm, although the pain remained. Claire and I stayed in touch. She had left her job as a flight attendant 3 months after the trial, emotionally exhausted by the media attention and by reliving the trauma of her own father's loss during the legal process. "I need a change," she told me over the phone when she informed me of her decision. "Something that has more meaning, more purpose." She enrolled in the law school at Chicago State University, inspired by our shared experience. "I want to help other people the way I helped you," she explained. "I want to be the voice of those who are not heard." We met every 2 or 3 months when she traveled to Florida to visit her grandmother, who lived in a nearby coastal county. We had dinner at some beachfront restaurant, sharing grilled fish and cold beer while the sun set, tinting the sky in oranges and purples. It was an unlikely friendship, born in the darkest of circumstances, but authentic. Claire was 26 years old, almost 40 years younger than me. But the bond that united us transcended age. We were 2 survivors of family betrayals, 2 people who had stared into the abyss and decided to move forward. "Have you heard anything from Emily?" she asked me during one of our dinners. "About 8 months after the trial." I shook my head, taking a sip of my beer. "Nothing. And honestly, I do not know what I would say to her if she contacted me." "Have you thought about visiting her?" The question caught me by surprise. "Visiting her? In prison, I am just asking," Claire said softly. "Sometimes closure requires confrontation. Not for her, but for you." I reflected on her words for days. Did I want to see Emily? Did I need to do it? The idea filled me with a mix of longing and terror. Longing for my daughter, the little girl she had been, the woman I thought she was. Terror at the stranger she had become. I decided I was not ready yet. Perhaps I never would be. Instead, I immersed myself in my writing. I had started what I initially planned as a simple memoir, but it was transforming into something more. A reflection on trust, betrayal, justice, and forgiveness. A book that explored not only my story, but the stories of others who had experienced similar betrayals. I interviewed people I had met through the legal process, victims of family frauds, elderly people exploited by their own children, parents whose trust had been betrayed in the cruelest of ways. Each story was unique, but they all shared common themes. The initial disbelief, the deep pain, the struggle to rebuild a life after the structure of trust that supported it had collapsed. My editor in New York City was enthusiastic. "This is powerful. Frank," he told me during a video call, "it is not just your story. It is a window into a social problem that many prefer to ignore." The book became my therapy, my purpose, writing every morning on my terrace, with the sound of the waves in the background and steaming coffee by my side, helped me process what I had lived through. The words flowed, sometimes with pain, sometimes with rage, but always with honesty. It was during this writing process that I received the letter. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. The town mailman, Mr. Stevens, an older man with a perpetually tilted straw hat, handed it to me with a curious expression. "It comes from the state penitentiary," he commented, referring to the high-security prison where Emily was serving her sentence. My hand trembled slightly as I took the envelope. It was the first time Emily had contacted me in almost a year. I waited until nightfall to open it. I poured myself a bourbon, sat on the terrace under a starry sky, and finally tore the envelope. The handwriting was Emily's. That was indisputable. Small, careful, the same calligraphy I had known for years. "Dad, I do not know if you will read this. I do not know if you should read it, but I need to write it, even if it is only for myself. I have had a lot of time to think here. Too much time, perhaps. The walls of my cell are silent witnesses to the questions I ask myself every night. How did I get to this? At what moment did the daughter you knew transform into the woman who tried to kill you? I am not looking for excuses. There are none. What I did was unforgivable, and I know it. But I think I deserve at least to try to explain it, not to justify myself, but so that maybe someday you can understand." Ryan dragged me into his world of debt and desperation gradually. At first, it was small loans he promised to pay back. Then, larger and larger commitments. By the time I realized the depth of the hole we were in, I had already crossed lines I never thought I would cross. Forging your signature on bank documents, modifying your life insurance, convincing myself I was just borrowing, that I would pay you back someday. But the debts grew. Ryan's creditors started threatening, not just with legal consequences, but with physical violence. Dangerous men he owed money to for his gambling. And then Ryan had the idea. At first, it horrified me. I refused to even listen to him, but he insisted, day after day, showing me how much money we would resolve, how we could start over, how in reality we would be saving you years of suffering in your old age. I convinced myself it was an act of mercy. How twisted that sounds now. The truth is I was a coward. A coward who chose your life over facing the consequences of my own decisions. A coward who convinced herself that murder was preferable to bankruptcy and divorce. I do not expect forgiveness. I do not deserve it. But I needed you to know that I was not always this monster. Or maybe I always was. And I just needed the right circumstances to reveal it. Mom would be devastated if she could see who I became. I honor her by dishonoring her memory every day I spend here. I have 18 more years in this prison. 18 years to live with what I did, with what I almost did. Sometimes I think it is not enough punishment, and other times I feel it is too much. Will you ever be able to forgive me? I do not even know if I want you to. Emily. I read the letter 3 times, my hands shaking more and more each time. Emotions overwhelmed me. Anger, pain, sadness, and something I did not expect to feel. Compassion, not for what she had done, but for the destroyed person revealed in those words. My daughter was broken, and a part of me, a part I wished I could silence, still wanted to protect her, to help her. I did not sleep that night. I stayed on the porch until dawn, watching the stars slowly disappear while the sky turned pink and gold. The ocean kept its eternal rhythm, indifferent to the human drama unfolding in my heart. The next morning, I called Dr. Martin and scheduled an emergency session. "What do you feel after reading the letter?" she asked me, sitting across from me in her office. "I don't know," I admitted. Everything and nothing. Anger because she expects her explanation to change something. Sadness because I can see her suffering, despite everything. Confusion because a part of me is still her father and wants to comfort her. Paternal love does not simply disappear because someone betrays us. "Doctor," Martin said softly, "it can coexist with anger, pain, even resentment. They are complex emotions, not mutually exclusive. The question is, do you want to reply to her?" That was the question, wasn't it? Did I want to enter into a dialogue with the woman who had tried to murder me? Was there anything worth saying I don't know? I repeated. "You don't have to decide right now, Doctor," Martin advised. "Take your time. Forgiveness, if it ever comes, is a process, not a single event." I kept the letter in a drawer of my desk and tried to move on with my life. But her words haunted me. At night, while I tried to write, her voice echoed in my head. During my morning walks on the beach, I saw her face in my mind, not the woman who had betrayed me, but the little girl she had been. Emily at 5 years old, running toward me with open arms after my first day of classes. Emily at 12, crying on my shoulder when her first love had disappointed her. Emily at 21, glowing with pride at her college graduation. Where had I lost that little girl? Or had she never really existed the way I remembered her? 2 weeks after receiving the letter, I made a decision. I would not reply to her. At least, not yet. But I would not destroy her letter either. I would keep it along with all the other pieces of this impossible puzzle that was my life now. Claire came to visit me that weekend. I showed her the letter. She read it in silence, her expression impossible to read. Finally, she looked up. "What are you going to do? Nothing?" I replied. "For now, nothing." She nodded. "That is a valid decision, too. You do not have to forgive her. William You do not owe her that. I know, but a part of me wonders if forgiveness would be more for me than for her. To free myself from this burden, forgiveness does not mean forgetting. Claire said, nor does it mean that what she did is okay. It can simply mean that you decide to stop letting her betrayal define the rest of your life. Her words resonated deeply within me. That night, after Claire headed back to Chicago, I sat down to write. Not a reply to Emily, but a chapter in my book, a chapter about forgiveness, about the complexity of loving someone who has deeply hurt you, about the possibility or impossibility of redemption. 18 months after the trial, my book was published, Whispers in the Air, a story of betrayal, survival, and the pursuit of justice. It hit bookstores in March, just as the cherry blossoms were blooming in Washington, coloring the streets in pale pink. I did not expect much. I thought it would be one of those modestly selling books that some people would read and then forget. Just a personal testimony. Nothing more. I was completely wrong. The first week it sold 10,000 copies. The second week, 20,000. By the end of the first month, Whispers in the Air was on the bestseller lists of the major newspapers in the country. The interview requests started pouring in, first local media in South Carolina, then national radio stations, then morning television shows. My publisher in New York was ecstatic. William, you have to come to the city. He insisted over the phone. There is a media tour waiting for you. A major national network wants to do a 1-hour special interview with you. I hesitated. I had built my new life precisely to escape attention, to be anonymous. But then I thought of all the people whose stories I had included in the book, those who had trusted me to give a voice to their pain. All right, I finally agreed, but only for 2 weeks. Then I am going back home. The media tour was exhausting but eye-opening. In every interview, on every radio show, I received calls from people sharing similar experiences. Elderly people exploited by their children, families torn apart by greed, victims of fraud perpetrated by those they trusted the most. Your story gave me the courage to report my own son. A 70-year-old woman told me on a live call during a radio show. Her voice was trembling, but there was determination in it. I thought I was alone, that it was my fault somehow. But you proved that we do not have to stay silent. Those moments made all the public exposure worth it. During the television interview, the host asked me something no one else had had the courage to ask directly. Mr. William, have you forgiven your daughter? The studio went completely silent. The cameras zoomed in. I could feel the anticipation of the audience. I took a deep breath. Forgiveness is a complex process, I began. It is not a switch you can turn on or off. Some days, I feel like I have made progress toward it. Other days, the anger returns as if everything had happened yesterday. But do you think you will ever be able to forgive her honestly? I do not know, and I have learned to be at peace with that uncertainty. What I do know is that I have decided not to let her betrayal define the rest of my life. That, for me, is enough for now. The response resonated with many viewers. Social media filled with comments from people who identified with that struggle, with the honesty of not having all the answers. The book also generated unexpected legal consequences. Several cases mentioned in my pages led to new police investigations. Ryan's aunt's case, which had been closed as a natural death, was finally reopened after public pressure. Her body was exhumed, and new forensic tests revealed levels of sedatives incompatible with her medical prescription. Ryan faced additional murder charges. His sentence was extended to 35 years. Emily, who had cooperated with the authorities in this new investigation, saw her sentence reduced by 2 years. 18 years became 16. A small difference on paper, but significant for her. I suppose. Her lawyer contacted me after the sentence reduction. Your daughter wants to know if you would be willing to visit her. He told me over the phone. She understands if the answer is no. But she asked me to ask you. Tell her I will think about it. I replied, without committing. The truth was, I did not know if I wanted to see her. The letter had been hard to process. A face-to-face visit would be exponentially more complicated. I consulted with Dr. Martin during my next session. What are you afraid of regarding seeing her? She asked. I am afraid that seeing her, all the anger will come back. Or worse, I am afraid that seeing her, all my resolve will crumble, and I will end up forgiving her before I am really ready. And would either of those things be wrong? I don't know. Would it? She smiled gently. William, there is no instruction manual for this. There is no right way to handle surviving your own daughter trying to murder you. Trust your gut. If you are not ready, do not go. And if you are never ready, that is okay too. I decided not to go, at least not yet. Instead, I wrote her a letter, the first direct communication with Emily since the trial. Emily, your lawyer informed me of your desire for me to visit you. I have thought deeply about this, and I have decided that I am not yet ready for a face-to-face meeting. It is not cruelty on my part, but self-preservation. I have worked hard to rebuild my life after what happened, and I am not willing to risk that fragile stability. I read your letter several times. In fact, I understand there is regret in your words. I also see the attempts to rationalize the irrationalizable. Both things can be true simultaneously. I do not know if I will ever be able to forgive you, but what I can say is this. I do not hate you. Hate requires an energy I no longer have, that I no longer want to spend. I have built a new life. It is smaller than the old one in some ways, but richer in others. I have found purpose in telling our story, in helping others who have faced similar betrayals. If someday in the distant future I feel I am ready to see you, I will let you know. Until then, I wish you peace to the extent that it is possible to find it behind those walls. Dad, sending that letter gave me a sense of closure I did not expect. It was not forgiveness. It was not reconciliation. But it was communication. It was acknowledging that Emily still existed somewhere in my reality, even if it was on the margins. Claire graduated from law school that same month. I attended her ceremony in Chicago, sitting between her grandmother and her mother, clapping when her name was called. After the ceremony, we had dinner at a traditional restaurant near the downtown Symphony Hall. Claire radiated happiness, her eyes shining with plans and ambitions. I am going to specialize in elder law, she announced. I already have an offer from a firm that works specifically on financial exploitation cases. Your father would be very proud. I told her, and I saw her blink rapidly, holding back tears. I know. And you should be too. This career, this path. It started the day you decided to trust a stranger. A flight attendant. I laughed. You made all the tough calls. Claire, I was just lucky you were on that flight. It was not luck, her grandmother said, an 80-year-old woman with piercing eyes. It was providence. You two needed each other. Maybe she was right. In the midst of the darkness of betrayal, I had found an unexpected light, in the form of a young woman who refused to stay silent. The impact of the book continued to expand. Colleges began inviting me to give lectures on family ethics and elder protection. Elder rights organizations asked me to join their boards. The federal government even consulted me for new legislation designed to better protect older people against family financial fraud. Look at what you have achieved. My publisher told me during the launch of the book's third edition. You transformed your tragedy into real social change. But on quiet nights on my porch in South Carolina, watching the stars reflect on the ocean, I knew the true achievement was simpler and deeper than that. I had survived, not just physically, but emotionally. I had taken the worst imaginable betrayal, and I had chosen not to let it destroy me. That was enough. 3 years after the incident on the plane, life had acquired a rhythm I never imagined would be possible. Every morning I woke up to the sound of the waves crashing against the coast. I brewed coffee in my small kitchen, stepped out onto the porch, and watched the sunrise paint the sky in oranges and pinks. It was a simple, almost monastic routine, but it brought me a peace I had forgotten existed. The book had gone into its 5th edition. The royalties allowed me to live comfortably without touching my savings. More importantly, the money allowed me to contribute to causes that now mattered deeply to me. Foundations for the protection of the elderly, free legal aid programs, shelters for victims of family violence. Claire had thrived in her legal career. She now worked for a non-profit organization representing seniors in financial exploitation cases. She sent me regular updates on her cases, always careful to protect her clients' confidentiality, but sharing the victories she achieved. "We won another case today," she texted me one July afternoon. A 73-year-old woman whose son stole $120,000 from her. "We got everything back, and he is facing charges. I could not do this without your example." William, those messages filled me with a pride I had not felt in years. If anything good had come out of my tragedy, it was this: a brilliant young woman dedicating her life to protecting others from suffering what I had suffered. But despite all this superficial peace, there was a question that kept haunting me. Should I visit Emily? It had been 3 years since the trial. 2 years since my letter. She had replied, briefly, thanking me for my words and respecting my decision not to visit her. She had not pressed. She had not asked again. That silence somehow weighed more than any plea. One September afternoon, I was sitting on the beach when a group of children ran past, laughing and screaming as they chased a ball. A 5-year-old girl tripped and fell near me. Before I could react, her father came running, picked her up tenderly, checked her scraped knees, and comforted her with kisses on the forehead. The scene transported me decades back. Emily at that age, falling off her bike in the park, me running toward her, picking her up, wiping her tears. "It's okay, sweetie," I had told her. "Dad is here." The memory hit me with unexpected force. I had to look away, breathing deeply against the wave of emotion that threatened to drown me. That night, I called Dr. Martin. Although I no longer had regular sessions, she had insisted I contact her whenever I needed to. "William, what is wrong?" she asked, instantly detecting the tension in my voice. "I think I need to see her," I said without preamble. "Emily, I think I need to look her in the eyes. And I do not know. Understand. Forgive. Close the circle." "What changed?" she asked softly. I told her about the little girl on the beach, about how that simple moment had unearthed years of memories. She was my daughter before she was my potential murderer, I said, surprised by my own cracking voice. And I think I need to remind her of that. Or remind myself. I do not know. Are you prepared for what you might find? It has been 3 years. People change, especially in prison. I don't know, but I think not knowing is worse than finding out. A week later, I drove from my coastal town up to Chicago, a 5-hour drive that gave me too much time to think, to doubt, to consider turning around dozens of times. I spent the night at Peter's house, my old friend who had taken me in during the darkest days. "Are you sure about this?" he asked as we drank bourbon in his living room. "No," I admitted, "but I am going to do it anyway." The next morning, I drove to the maximum security state penitentiary. The building was exactly as I imagined it. Imposing, gray, surrounded by high walls, topped with barbed wire. A place designed to contain, not to rehabilitate. Despite its official name, the entry process was long and humiliating. ID checks, metal detectors, body searches, repeated explanations of the purpose of my visit. Finally, I was led into a visiting room, a large space with tables and chairs bolted to the floor. A guard in every corner, the murmur of other conversations from broken families filling the air. I sat down to wait, my heart beating so fast I thought the others could hear it. Then I saw her. Emily walked in through a side door, escorted by a guard. She wore the standard beige prison uniform, her hair tied back in a simple ponytail. She had lost weight. Her face, once round and youthful, now showed sharp angles. But the most striking thing was her eyes. They looked decades older than the rest of her. Our eyes met across the room. Shock, then hope, then fear crossed her face in rapid succession. She approached slowly, almost cautiously, as if she feared I was a mirage that would vanish if she moved too fast. "Dad," she said when she reached the table. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Emily." We sat down, a metal table between us, an ocean of unsaid words, unhealed wounds, of love and betrayal intertwined in ways neither of us knew how to untangle. "I never expected to see you again," she said finally. Her hands clasped on the table. I noticed she was biting her nails. A nervous childhood habit I thought she had outgrown. I did not expect to come either. I admitted, but here I am. Silence. Then, "Did you read my letter?" "Yes. Several times. And yours made me cry for days. Not from sadness, but from relief. Relief that you did not hate me. That you still thought of me as your daughter. Even if it is on the margins. You are my daughter," I said, surprised by the firmness in my voice. That never stopped being true. Regardless of what you did. Her eyes filled with tears. "I do not deserve that grace. Probably not. But here we are anyway." We spent the next hour talking, not about the immediate past, not about the plane or the poisoning or the trial. Those topics were too heavy for this fragile first visit. Instead, we talked about small things. I told her about my house in South Carolina, about the sunsets and the walks on the beach. She told me about her routine in prison, about the classes she was taking, about the books she was reading. "I read your book," she said at one point. "Everyone here read it. At first, it was horrible." The other inmates pointed at me, whispered. But then, some started talking to me. Women who had also betrayed their families, who also carried impossible guilt. We formed a sort of makeshift support group. It helps. It helps to know I am not a unique monster. That many good people do terrible things when they are desperate and scared and weak. That does not excuse it, I said softly. I know. I am not looking for excuses. Just context. Understanding. Not for you, but for myself. So I can live with what I did. When the guard announced visiting time was over, Emily stood up slowly. Will you come back? She asked, her voice small and hopeful. I hesitated. Honesty seemed more important than kindness right now. I do not know. Maybe I need to process this first. She nodded, blinking back tears. Thank you for coming, for giving me this gift. I know I did not deserve it. Emily, I said before she walked away. She turned around. I am working on forgiveness. I am not there yet, but I am working on it. A sad smile crossed her face. That is more than I dared to hope for. I watched her walk away, escorted back to her cell, back to her remaining 16 years of confinement. My daughter and a stranger, both in the same body. The drive back was different from the drive there. Lighter somehow, though also more confusing. I had not gotten the answers I expected. Mostly because I was not sure what the questions were. But I had done something I thought I never would do. I had looked my daughter in the eyes, and I had not felt hate. Pain. Yes. Sadness. Absolutely. But not hate. That night, back on my porch, I wrote in my journal for the first time in months. Today, I visited Emily. I do not know what I expected to find. A monster. My little girl. I found someone in between. A broken woman trying to find pieces of humanity in the rubble of her own decisions. I have not forgiven her. I do not know if I ever fully will. But I think I finally understand that forgiveness is not a gift I give to her. It is a gift I give to myself. Mary, my dear Mary, I wish you were here to guide me. You were always better with matters of the heart. But I think today I did the right thing. I hope I did. I closed the journal and looked out at the dark ocean, barely visible under the moonlight. The waves kept their eternal rhythm, indifferent to the human drama of fathers and daughters, of betrayal and tentative forgiveness. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt that maybe, just maybe, I could find my way back to something resembling peace. 5 years had passed since that flight changed my life forever. 5 years since an unknown flight attendant whispered words that saved my life. 5 years of rebuilding, of healing, of learning to live with scars that would never completely disappear. But that, over time, had stopped hurting constantly. It was a November morning when I received the call I was not expecting. Mr. William. The voice was unfamiliar. Formal. I am the director of the state penitentiary. I am calling to inform you that your daughter Emily has been transferred to a halfway house program. Due to her good behavior and participation in rehabilitation programs, she qualified to serve the remainder of her sentence in a semi-open regime. I sat down slowly, processing the information. Emily had been in prison for 5 years. She had 11 more to go. But now she would have the opportunity to work outside during the day, to gradually reintegrate into society under strict supervision. Does this require anything on my part? I asked. No. Sir, we just thought you would want to know. She talked a lot about you in her therapy sessions. Your visit 2 years ago was a turning point for her. After hanging up, I sat on my porch for a long time, watching the ocean. I had visited Emily 3 more times since that first visit. Not regularly, not as often as she perhaps wished, but enough to maintain a thin thread of connection between us. With each visit, I had seen her change. The initial hardening from prison gradually gave way to something different. It was not the Emily I had known before. That woman would never return. But it was someone new, someone who was genuinely trying to understand how she had gotten to that point, how to rebuild some humanity from the ashes of her choices. She had started teaching reading classes to other inmates. She had completed an accounting program. She had religiously attended group and individual therapy. She was not doing it for me. I realized she was doing it for herself, because she needed to find a way to live with herself. That afternoon, I wrote her a letter. Emily, I was informed about your transfer to the halfway program. I am proud of you. I know those words might sound strange coming from me, considering everything, but they are sincere. The path you have traveled these 5 years has not been easy. I know this because I have also traveled my own path, parallel to yours, but completely different. I have learned that forgiveness is not a single event, but an ongoing process. There are days when I feel I have made significant progress. Other days, the anger returns like an unexpected wave. But overall, the trend is toward peace. I do not know what the future holds for us. I do not know if we will ever have a relationship that resembles what we had before. Because frankly, that relationship was built on foundations that turned out to be fragile. But maybe we can build something new. Not father and daughter in the traditional sense, but two people who share a complicated and painful history, who are trying to find meaning and redemption in their own ways. Keep moving forward. Sweetie, rebuild your life. Become someone you can be proud of. With complicated but real love. Dad. Claire visited me the following week. She now had her own law firm. Small but growing, specializing in defending the elderly. Her reputation was solid. The local newspapers had featured her several times as the lawyer fighting for the forgotten. We sat on my favorite porch, drinking coffee as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. I have been thinking about something, she said after a long, comfortable silence. Do you remember the day on the plane when I whispered for you to get up? Like it was yesterday, I was terrified. She confessed. Not just for you, but for me. What if I was wrong? What if I had misinterpreted the conversation? What if I ruined your relationship with your daughter for nothing? You were not wrong. I know that now. But in that moment, William, I almost did not do it. I almost decided it was not my problem, that I should stay out of it. I turned to her, studying her profile as she looked out at the ocean. What made you decide, my father? She said simply. I thought of all the times I wished someone had spoken up, that someone had seen the signs, that someone had had the courage to intervene. And I realized that if I did not act, I would become one of those people who choose comfort over doing what is right. You saved my life with that decision, and you saved mine, she replied, turning to me with tears in her eyes. You gave me a purpose. You showed me that pain can be transformed into something meaningful. My entire career, everything I do now, started on that plane. We sat in silence. Two survivors bonded by extraordinary circumstances, by choices made in crucial moments, by the mutual choice not to let betrayal and pain define the rest of our lives. Do you know what is the strangest thing I said after a while? Sometimes I find myself grateful. Claire looked at me in surprise. Grateful for all of it, for the plane, for discovering the truth. Even for the betrayal, because it forced me to examine my life, to ask difficult questions, to find meaning in places I never would have looked. That is profound. Or maybe it is just the way my mind has found to make sense of the senseless, I admitted with a sad smile. But either way, it is where I am now. The book had sparked a movement bigger than I ever imagined. It had become required reading in social work programs at several colleges across the country. Support groups for victims of family fraud quoted passages in their meetings. Legislators had used stories from the book to justify new protection laws. I received letters weekly from people sharing their own stories, thanking me for giving them a voice, for making them feel less alone. Some letters were from victims. Others, surprisingly, were from perpetrators. Sons and daughters who had exploited their parents, and who now, in prison or free, struggled with their own guilt and quest for redemption. One letter in particular had moved me deeply. It was from a 35-year-old man in Dallas, Texas. Mr. William, I write to you from the deepest shame. 3 years ago, I forged my mother's signature on bank documents and stole her life savings. She died 6 months later, not knowing her own son had betrayed her. I read your book and saw my own inner monster reflected. The difference is that you survived to tell your story. My mother did not get that chance. I am not looking for forgiveness. I do not deserve it. But I wanted you to know that your story drove me to seek help, to try to understand how I got to that point, to donate every dollar I stole with interest to organizations that protect the elderly. I cannot undo what I did, but thanks to you, I'm trying to make sure the rest of my life means something. I replied to that man, and to all the others who wrote to me. Each letter was a reminder that our stories, no matter how painful, have the power to touch lives, to provoke change, to offer hope even in the deepest darkness. Peter, my old friend, visited me on my 70th birthday. He arrived with a bottle of small batch bourbon and a wide smile. Look who made it to 70, he joked. And I thought you wouldn't survive 64. We laughed. That kind of dark humor that only those who have survived tragedies can share. Are you happy? William, he asked me later. When the bourbon had softened the edges of the conversation, I considered the question carefully. Happy is a complicated word. I am at peace. Most days, yes. I have found meaning. Absolutely. I have rebuilt a life worth living. Without a doubt. That sounds like happiness to me. Then I suppose I am. I conceded. A different happiness than the one I knew before. Smaller in some ways, deeper in others. The years passed. Emily completed her halfway program successfully and was eventually released after serving 11 years in total. Her exemplary behavior, her participation in rehabilitation programs, and her genuine remorse had resulted in the reduction of her sentence. I was not there the day she was released. I was not ready for that. But I sent her a letter with enough money to rent a modest apartment for 6 months and a job reference with an old colleague who ran a small accounting firm. She called me a week after her release, crying so hard I could barely understand her words. Thank you, Dad. Thank you for not abandoning me completely. Thank you for giving me a chance. We all deserve a second chance. I replied, what you do with it is up to you. We did not see each other for months after that. We talked occasionally on the phone, brief and somewhat awkward conversations, but gradually more natural. She told me about her job, about the yoga classes she had started taking, about the therapy she continued weekly. I am building a life, she told me in one of our conversations. It is small. It is humble. But it is honest. It is mine. I am happy for you, sweetie. And I meant it. 7 years after the incident on the plane, Claire got married. She invited me to the wedding, and I felt deeply honored to attend. The ceremony was small but beautiful, in a garden in the Chicago suburbs, with wildflowers and sunlight filtering through the trees. During the reception, Claire introduced me to her husband, a doctor who worked at a community clinic. William is the reason I do what I do, Claire told him. He is my constant reminder that one person can make a difference. You are the one who made a difference, I reminded her. I was just lucky you were on that plane. She hugged me, tight and long. It was not luck. It was destiny. That night, back at my house in South Carolina, I sat on my porch and reflected on the full arc of this extraordinary story. From the whispers on a plane to tonight, celebrating the marriage of a young woman who had become chosen family. I thought of Emily, now living a quiet life in Columbus. Ohio, working honestly, rebuilding her humanity piece by piece. We saw each other once a year, brief but meaningful encounters. We were not father and daughter in the traditional sense, but we were something. We were two people who shared a terrible past and who had chosen, each in our own way, not to let that past completely destroy our future. I thought of Claire, now starting her own family, carrying forward the work of protecting the vulnerable, turning her own pain into purpose. I thought of all the people who had written to me, who had found comfort or inspiration or simply company in my story. And I thought of myself, William, 73 years old, retired professor, author, survivor, a man who had looked into the abyss of the deepest betrayal and had chosen not to jump, but to step back, to rebuild, to rediscover the meaning of life. I opened my journal, that constant companion of all these years, and I wrote one last entry. Mary, my love, it has been 9 years since you passed. 9 years in which I have lived enough pain, betrayal, healing, and redemption for several lifetimes. If you were here, you would ask me if I have forgiven Emily. And honestly, I still do not have a simple answer. Some days I feel I have. Other days the anger resurfaces. But I have learned that forgiveness is not binary. It exists on a spectrum, and I move along that spectrum depending on the day. What I do know is this. I have forgiven life for being complicated, for not fitting into simple narratives of good guys and bad guys, victims and villains. I have forgiven our daughter for being human. Terribly, tragically human. And most importantly, I have forgiven myself for not seeing the signs, for trusting too much, for all the I should haves that tormented me for years. I have built a good life from the ashes of the old one. It is different, smaller in some ways, but also richer, more conscious, more authentic. I love you. I miss you. And I keep moving forward, knowing you would be proud of the man I have become through all of this. Until we meet again. William, I closed the journal and looked out at the ocean. The waves kept their eternal rhythm, constant despite all the human drama unfolding on their shores. And then I understood it. The final lesson this entire experience had taught me. Betrayal does not define who we are. It defines who they were when they betrayed us. Our response to that betrayal. Our choice to get up or stay down. To close our hearts or keep them open despite the pain. To let hate consume us or to choose the difficult path toward peace. That is what defines us. And I had chosen to get up. I had chosen to rebuild. I had chosen to find meaning. I had chosen to live. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something urged me to do it. Mr. William, a young, trembling voice said, "My name is Robert. You do not know me. But I read your book. My father is planning something terrible against his brother for inheritance money. I heard their conversation, and I do not know what to do. Can you help me?" I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the responsibility, but also the profound satisfaction of knowing my story had reached someone else who needed it, at the exact moment they needed it. "Yes," I said with a firm voice. "I can help you. Tell me everything." And so, the circle continued. Claire saving me saving others through my story, others using that story to save more people. Light is born from darkness. Hope emerges from pain. Redemption is possible, even from the deepest places of betrayal. And sometimes, all it takes is for someone to whisper, Get up! Do not look back. I got up. I kept moving forward, and I lived to tell the tale. 10 years after the incident on the plane, I gave a lecture at a college in Chicago, my old institution. The auditorium was full of students, professors, social workers, and activists. I told my story one more time, but this time with a perspective that only a decade of healing could provide. At the end, a young student raised her hand. "Professor William," she said in a timid voice, "after everything that happened, how do you find the strength to keep trusting people?" I smiled, thinking of Claire, of Peter, of all those who had shown me kindness when I needed it most. "The betrayal of one person does not define all of humanity," I replied. "For every person who betrayed me, there were 10 more who showed me compassion. For every moment of darkness, there were countless moments of light. Trust is not naive when it is given with eyes wide open, aware of the risks, but choosing to love anyway." And forgiveness asked another voice, "How do you know when you have truly forgiven? You do not know for sure." I admitted, "Forgiveness is not a destination you arrive at and stay forever. It is a direction you travel. Some days you advance further in that direction. Other days you step back. But as long as you keep choosing the path of forgiveness over the path of hate, you are winning." As I left the college that afternoon, an older woman stopped me in the parking lot. "Mr. William?" she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "My son stole all my savings last year. I have been so angry, so broken. But after hearing you today, I think I can try to heal." I hugged her, this stranger who suddenly was not so much a stranger, because we shared the invisible bond of those who have been betrayed by their own blood. "You can," I told her. "It will not be easy. But you can, and you are not alone." As I drove back to my coastal town that night, with the sun setting to my left and the road stretching out before me, I felt a deep gratitude for having survived, gratitude for Claire, whose courage saved my life, gratitude for every person who showed me kindness when they could have chosen indifference, gratitude even for the betrayal, because it taught me the depth of my own resilience. And when I arrived home, to my small refuge by the sea, I knew with absolute certainty that I had lived well these 10 stolen years. These years that were never supposed to be mine, but that had become the most meaningful of my life. The waves kept crashing against the coast. The stars kept shining in the sky. And I was still here, living, healing, growing. Because that is what survivors do. We get up, we do not look back, and we keep moving forward.